Well, we're in chapter 6 of the book of Zechariah, and we're about 518 to 520 BC, before Christ. We're looking at the 8 visions, and we finally came to the 8th vision. And I'd like to say that I really fully understand this vision, and I'm sure that the 5 or 6 commentaries that I referred to try to get some clarity to this would also like to know exactly what this means. Just as the 7th vision was very, very hard to explain, and very few people had a real handle on it. I find that the same thing is true for this 8th vision. There is a truth here in the 8th vision that I want to emphasize because I think it's a really important truth. And so if you don't get anything else out of this particular 8th vision other than this truth, then I will be very disappointed, because there's a great truth, I think, in the 8th vision that may or may not parallel Revelation chapter 6, the breaking of the seals, and the horses that go out there. In any case, let's take a look at the text. Now I lifted up my eyes again and looked, and behold, 4 chariots were coming forth from between the 2 mountains, and the mountains were bronze mountains. With the first chariot were red horses, with the second chariot black horses, and the third chariot white horses, with the fourth chariot strong dapple horses. Then I spoke and said to the angel who was speaking with me, "What are these things, my Lord?" The angel replied to me, "These are the 4 spirits of heaven, going forth after standing before the Lord of all of the earth, with one of which the black horses are going north to the north country, and the white ones go forth after them, while the dappled ones go forth to the south country." When the strong ones went out, they were eager to go out to patrol the earth. And he said, "Go, patrol the earth." So they patrolled the earth. Then he cried out to me and spoke to me, saying, "See, those who are going to the land of the north have appeased my wrath in the land of the north." Well, horses aren't even mentioned that many times in the scriptures, and certainly the colors of the horses are not mentioned very many times in the scriptures. And so we have symbolism that is hard to define based on a consistency of scripture. That's why I referred to Revelation chapter 6 earlier. Let's take a look and see again. We have 4 chariots. Now, chariots are only used for 2 things in the Old Testament scriptures. The first is to bring in nobility or royalty, and the second is for war. Most of them were war chariots. And here we have to assume that these are war chariots. The horses are only to define the purpose of the war chariots. That is, the horse colors are to represent the purpose of the chariots going out. And so we see the red horse. This particular horse has typically been used, and again, remember, there's very few references, for war. The second horse is a white horse, and of course, most of us who watch cowboy and Indian movies think that the white horse is always good. But in the scriptures, we find that white horse can very often be death or famine, and so we see that that's a possibility of the interpretation of that chariot that's going out. The black horse, again, with very few references, very often represents not only war, but death and pestilence. And the dappled horse, and in case you didn't know what a dappled horse was, it's a spotted horse, one that's neither white or black or brown, but has multiple colors on it. And that's not red, green, or blue, but that's multiple horse colors. Are strong horses. And again, very few references on horses with dapple. Nevertheless, if we take a look at the limited meaning of those, it can mean pestilence and famine, and it can mean mixed events. So we have those horses. The red horses don't go out. It's apparent that they only are there to represent the fact that there is a judgment or a war coming. And one of the things that we know for sure is that when Zechariah asked the angel, "What is this all about?" he says, "These are the four spirits of heaven." Now, you wouldn't think that the spirits of heaven would be warlike, uh, death, pestilence, and famine, but apparently they clearly are. And we see the four going to the north, followed by four more going to the north. So we have a war, we have death and pestilence following it. And of course, for the last closing verse, verse 8, it says that vengeance, wrath of God, has been brought on the north. So we see these as being a judgmental horse and a judgmental chariot, if you will, that goes then, quite a tremendous wrath being poured out on the north. To the south, it looks like it's a mixed bag. It looks like to the south there is some judgment, some pestilence, some turmoil. This certainly would be appropriate for the tribulation period, more judgment being brought out on the greater guilt of the nations. Some have said that the north only represents Babylon, which would be Iraq and Iran area, Syria. Others have said it's all the way to the north to Russia, and that perhaps there's an alliance by that time between Iran and Iraq and Russia, and that the judgment is brought against all of these nations, some that are false religions and some that are no religion at all, atheists. In any case, to the north, we find great judgment. To the south, a mixed bag of judgment, and these are stronger horses. These are eager to get about their business of judging, about bringing judgment. The two bronze mountains, bronze typically throughout the scriptures have been used to represent judgment. And so we see these large bronze mountains as being the judgment of God. And we know that the judgment of God is going to be swift. So if we look at Revelation chapter 6, we have some support for this particular theory of what these chariots and these horses represent. But I told you that every time we read scripture, we should find some application. And there's some strong application here that I hope that regardless of what commentary you read and who you believe about what this vision that Zechariah had is, God is on his throne. These chariots have had to stand before him, and it is he that sends them out. God's on his throne. God is in control. And God sends out these chariots for a final judgment upon nations who deserve his wrath. It's very encouraging to me to know that justice will eventually prevail and that judgment is coming. And most assuredly, it's encouraging to me that God is on his throne. So interpret this passage of scripture the best you can. Look at the commentaries and see what the different writers have to say about it. It's a difficult passage. Almost all of the commentaries that I read acknowledge that it's a difficult passage, for there's so little given to us directly by the angel, and there's so little representation of horses and horse colors throughout the scriptures that there's got to be a lot of divine speculation here. I think one thing that we don't have to speculate on is God being on his throne, God in control, a final judgment coming, and it will be appropriate to the justice that is required by the wrath of God. That's my thought for the day. God bless you and have a good day.